Morning glory and evening grace, America. Good Friday to you. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. So glad that you're with me for our big weekend show. As usual, we look back at the week's events. And as usual, I begin with John Ellis, founder and editor-in-chief of News Items, which is my daily must-read before the show. Good Friday to you, John, and a great weekend ahead, I hope. What did you think was most important in the news this week?
Well, I think, the Pope's passing obviously was the major story, but in terms of what we do at News Items, the big story was the shooting in Kashmir, 26 people dead, the worst terrorist event there since Mumbai in 2008, and one that is fraught with aftershocks, let's say. They're already, the Pakistani forces and the Indian forces have been shooting at one another. Pakistan is, shall we say, beholden to China. U.S. policy has tilted for a long time towards India. And so you have not just a conflict or a fight between India and Pakistan, but you also have a sort of shadow boxing behind it between China and the U.S. So it's a huge story, and one that is developing, as they say.
I want to remind everyone, both Pakistan and India are nuclear powers. They've had a long history of conflict, though it hasn't been that intense in recent years. Any idea who is behind the attack, John Ellis? Because not much news made here. I've been following it through News Items, but it didn't really strike the American news scene with much of an impact.
Yeah, the reason that people pay special attention to it is because both states, Pakistan and India, have nuclear weapons. So anything that escalates to the point that might be a consideration is something of global concern. President Obama said it was Pakistan was the thing that kept him up at night when he was president. The group in question calls itself the Kashmir Resistance. It's little known, but the way they distinguish between the tourists that they were going to shoot and the tourists they weren't going to shoot is whether they could recite Islamic verse. So clearly, it's an Islamic terrorist organization of some kind.
And from your reporting, I gather the area that was invaded is a peaceful tourist trap. Basically, people go there with kids and families and enjoy weekends and weeks off. So it was, if it were in the United States, it could be, Napa Valley, it could be Boca Raton, Florida. It's not a place that's used to this sort of violence. I doubt they had the security staff, did they?
No, it had been, it's a contested region, right? And so there have been tensions going back a long time. But for the last 10 years or so, maybe 15 years or so, the tensions have eased. And this region has become, as you say, maybe not a tourist trap, but a tourist destination. The shock of this assault, if you will, this mass murder, is sort of double. It would be like having not quite like it, but having a massacre at Disneyland or something like that.
So the line of control has been in dispute forever. Is this along the line of control, or is that up in the Himalayas with China? I get my.
It's up. Yeah, the thing that's really difficult about it is that Pakistan isn't a nation so much as it is a collection of tribes. And so sorting out, which tribe did this, and Modi, the president or prime minister of India, is obviously under enormous pressure to, seek retribution, if you will. It's a very combustible situation because you're not sure who did it, number one. And number two, there's a lot of pressure on India to get whoever did it. It's scary. And again, it's scary because the ladder of escalation right now is low. But if it escalates up to the higher rungs, then it gets really problematic.
Oh, and Pakistan has never been anybody's idea of a stable or transparent government. Let's move on to
Yeah.
the couple of elections that are coming up this weekend or soon, John Ellis, both in Canada, our neighbor to the north, and Australia, our longtime ally and participant in Five Eyes, along with Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. What do we expect from both these places?
Well, it's an interesting. Canada is particularly interesting, I think, in part because it's our northern neighbors. But you had 6 months ago, the election set up that the Conservatives were going to win back power by an overwhelming margin. They were ahead by 20 plus percentage points in the polls. The candidate Pierre, whose last name I
Polyev.
sometimes
Yeah.
Poilievre, was seen as a serious contender. He had unified the conservative wings of the party, etc. So he was in a very strong position. Trump gets nominated or gets inaugurated, and he decides that Canada should be the 51st state. And suddenly the Liberal Party jumps on as the anti Trump party. The numbers flip, and suddenly the Liberals are ahead between 4 and 8 points. And that brings us up to the present moment. And the question is, does that 4 to 8 point lead hold, or does the election sort of drift back to where it was before Trump's quote intervention, end quote? We don't know the answer to that. The narrative is the liberal press and much of the Canadian press is that Trump has flipped the election and that it's on Monday, and that when the voting is all done, the liberals will have miraculously held on to power. I'm not entirely convinced that's the case, and others who follow Canadian politics much more closely than I do are also not convinced that's the case. So Monday's a big day, and we'll see. We'll see if the liberal press narrative is correct, or if not.
How about down under? The same sort of dynamic working that the Labor Party has surged because Donald Trump got
Yeah,
elected?
yeah. I mean, because Trump has created. I mean, Trump has done wonders for liberal politicians all around the world, and the two most prominent examples, obviously, are Canada and Australia. It looked like the quote liberalish party in Australia was going to go down to defeat. Trump came on the scene. He, broke a lot of glass, and suddenly they're up by 4 or 6 points. That election is in 2 weeks, and we're not. We'll see. We need to get closer to see what the polling shows, but again, it's the same thing. The conservatives were ahead. Trump, quote, intervened, end quote, and now the liberals are ahead. And the question is whether the liberals hang on to win or whether the election goes back to where it was
All right,
pre-Trump.
lastly, John Ellis, President Trump is approaching the 100-day mark. Everyone's polling about him. Would you give us a summary of those results?
His approval rating has flipped, right? He came in with more positive than negative. It's now more negative than positive. The four polls that I follow most closely, including the Fox News poll, show Trump's approval rating somewhere between 41 and 45%. I think Fox was 45%. And the disapproval is somewhere between 52 and 55%. So that is a dramatic shift in a very short period of time. What appears to be driving it above everything else is the tariffs and what people expect will come of the tariffs, which is inflation. So they have to sort of sort out their tariff story if they're going to see any kind of rebound. If they don't, then the downward slide will probably continue.
Now, John, what do you think happens after the reconciliation passes, which I assume it's going to do by July 4th? Jason Smith told me that this week. James Langford, who's also on Senate Finance, Jason Smith on House Ways and Means, pretty optimistic they get this done. Isn't that the real test of Trump in the first 100 days? And it's not in the first 100 days. It's a massive piece of legislation. If he gets that across the line, it's a good first 6 months.
If he gets it across the line, then they can do the end zone victory dance, and make that the story of the first 6 months, as you say. The question is whether the tariffs and inflation bite prior to that. And there's a lot of sort of grim news about shipping containers and empty trucks and so on and so forth that sort of point to a difficult May. If that turns out to be true and May becomes a difficult June, then it's problematic.
Yeah, I would suggest the Republicans in House and Senate giddy up. John Ellis, you can follow him on X at Ellis Items. You can subscribe to News Items by just entering that in your Google search, John Ellis News Items. And you'll be smart every morning when you read that. Great way to begin your day. Thank you, John. I'll be right back. America, stay tuned.